I'm in, and so is Dave, period. Hopefully you can jump on soon, period.
Hello,
Hey, Dave.
how are you today?
This is Steve.
Hello, Steve.
AJ got hit a wall with his internet, so he said he's going to be coming here soon. We can start with prayer, and then if you happen to cut out, then I'll just pick up the ball and run with it.
Okay.
All right. Awesome.
Good. Dear Lord, we just thank you for bringing us our guest here tonight, Dave Pratt, to help us the financial side of cattle and how to be more successful on our farms. Lord, we pray that each of the attendees can take some information away from this and apply it to their farms to help their families and their overall personal life, and their stress levels can decrease, and they can really enjoy the farming lifestyle. Lord, we just thank you for bringing everyone together. We thank you for the participants' willingness and eagerness to learn and to support the organization. Dear Lord, we just thank you for many blessings and give all the praise to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. So we got Dave Pratt returning here. Hopefully everyone had a chance to do their homework and look at the 3 secrets again. When I talked to Dave and outlined what we were looking to do for this webinar series, he kind of answered my question with a question and said, that's not typically how we'd like to look at this, but let's update you guys on the 3 secrets again. And he's going to walk us through. I told him that me personally, I'm pretty new into cow-calf, and I hadn't actually ever thought about the depreciation of the cow, which seems very obvious now looking back. But every time she has a calf, obviously she's not going to have infinite number of calves, so we do need to account for that. But I want to leave it up to Dave, and he can walk us through what he feels is necessary. And I guess one more announcement here before we get going. I'd like to thank Steve for being on the call and joining us. Today's his anniversary, so happy anniversary, Steve.
Well, thank you. We got to spend a good bit of time together today, so I have a little bit of grace for this evening. It's awesome. And Mel took the class with Ranching for Profit with me here in the spring, so she's all excited to know that Dave's on with us tonight too.
Obviously, she's never met me before.
That's true. We were hoping you'd teach this last one, but you had to call for a sub or go
That's
to the
right.
Hey, before a couple logistics real quick, Dave did mention, for those of you that haven't heard, that he's going to be teaching a class in Georgia for Ranching for Profit this coming June, the first week of June in Columbus, Georgia. There's still space to sign up for that, I believe. And go to ranchmanagement.com or just Google Ranching for Profit and it'll take you there. It's a fantastic, actually, it made worlds difference in my decision-making here at the farm. And so I recommend it any chance I can. The second thing is for everybody that's participating, if you, there's a button at the bottom of the screen, the Q&A. If you have questions, go ahead and fire them. Then we will facilitate a discussion at the end once Dave's finished. So you can use the Q&A to send your questions, and then we'll coordinate a question and answer time to follow up. So it's all yours, Dave. Good to have you again. Excited.
Oh, well, I appreciated your prayer earlier. I didn't do a very good job of that yesterday because my computer crashed. So I have been hustling this morning to recreate this, and I'm working on my wife's computer today. But I finished. Anyway, there may be a typo or two. We'll see. But it's good to be with you all. Let's start with just kind of the basis of what we do. Ranch management consultants. Actually, I'm no longer in ranch management consultants. I ran the company for 20 years. It was founded by Stan Parsons, who was originally from Zimbabwe. He was partners with Alan Savory. Most people, or a lot of people in this industry, know who Alan Savory is. Fewer know who Stan Parsons is or was. He passed away last summer from COVID. But Alan and Stan were partners when they came to the United States. Alan brought the ecology piece. Stan brought the economics and animal science piece, his economics PhD from Purdue in economics and a master's in animal ruminant physiology. Unfortunately, neither one brought the people skills, and so their partnership went the way of a lot of partnerships. I think that since I'm not running the company anymore and I have no financial stake in it, I don't have to be politically correct. I'll tell you what I think. More power to him. Alan Savory is a brilliant person, and I think he set out to save the world, and more power to him for that. When I went to this school, I was blown away. The holistic management program, I thought it was great, but I left not really knowing what to do with the information. About 6 months later, I went to Ranching for Profit, which is what Stan had started. And I didn't think Stan was very interested in saving the world. His passion was saving my business. And when I left that course, I knew exactly what to do. And I think that's one of the differences between the two programs. They're both high intensity, but the Ranching for Profit School is a business school, and you will leave with a plan. The school is based on one very simple concept, and that's that knowing how to raise livestock is not the same thing as knowing how to run a business that raises livestock. They are two entirely different skill sets. We do two things. I keep referring to ranch management consultants as we. After 20 years, it's hard to kick the habit. And Dallas throws me a bone now and then. I will be teaching the school in Georgia, and occasionally I do a few workshops for him, and I do some consulting on the side with some of the alumni. But there's two primary things. One is the school, and the second thing is Executive Link. In Executive Link, we organize graduates of the school into peer advisory groups. And it's based on two simple concepts. The first is that it's always easier to see and solve someone else's problem than your own. The neighbor's problems are easy to solve. Mine are much more complicated, of course. The other concept it's based on is this. When you're self-employed, you work for a nut. And the reason you work for a nut is because nobody holds you accountable. You work on the things that you enjoy doing, maybe the things you're good at. But sometimes those are the $10 an hour jobs. Meanwhile, we let $100 and $1,000 an hour jobs go undone. And anyone who would let their employee get away with that has to be crazy. So those are the two things we do. Now, when I first started teaching the school, Stan had me start teaching in Australia. And I think his thinking was the further away I went from home, the more people would assume I knew. But the first time out of the gate, when you do anything, you're not going to be terrific. And I was less than terrific in that first experience. And I think for Stan, standing in the back of the room watching me teach must have been, well, it must have been like watching your teenage daughter date a Hell's Angel. That's all I can picture. I was not doing well. And I remember it was the second day of the class, and I was going through the economic model, and I had left out something called a trading account. I'm going to show you a trading account later today. It's really, really simple, and it's really, really important. It's the way you calculate something called gross product. And gross product is the value of what you've produced. Anyway, I had left it out. So Stan stands in the back of the room and says, Dave, tell him about the trading account. The what? The trading account. Tell him about the trading account. I was just blank, and he had to take over the class. That evening, he took me aside, and in what could politely be called a debriefing, but was actually something much more severe than that, he said, Dave, do you even know what this school is for? I'm 7,000 miles away from home. I figure I better come up with something. So I said, well, it's to give people the tools to build sustainable businesses. He shook his head. Dave, you just don't get it yet. You still don't get it. This school has one purpose. It's to change the way people think. And at the time I thought, come on, it has to be more than that. It has to be more than that. I've come to learn that there is nothing more than that. Let me tell you why. You've probably heard the expression, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Well, first of all, that's simply not true. Because the field that we're playing the game on, the conditions in which we're playing have not stayed the same. They've changed. Land prices, way higher than they were 20 years ago. Fuel prices, way higher than they were 20 years ago. Guess what? If you do things the way you did 20 years ago, you will not get the same result. Your results will be different. They will probably be worse. The way Stephen Covey says it is this. He says, see, do, get. The way you see things determines the way you do things. And the way you do things determines what you're going to get. If I believe I need to wean big calves, if that's what I see, if that's the rule I've created for myself, I need to wean a big calf. Well, I'm going to have big cows. I'm going to push the feed to the cows. I'm going to calve early. Those are all the things I'm going to do. And what am I going to get? I'm going to get a big calf. So if the way I see things, or the paradigm I have, is that I have to do things this way, then I will do things that way, and that will lead me to whatever results I get. So really what this ought to say is if you always think what you've always thought, then you'll always do what you've always done, and you'll lose your shirt. Let's look at the way most ranchers see ranching. A lot of people will tell me ranching for profit. Well, that's an oxymoron. Here's the way a lot of people think about ranching. Well, input costs are too high. Government regulation keeps me from making a profit. Cattle prices are too low. Public is anti-ag. Land prices are too high. The packers are out to get me. Foreign competition is unfair. Harsh winters, severe drought, and dad won't change. All those reasons that ranching isn't profitable have one thing in common. And that's that I'm not responsible for any of them. I'm a victim. All of those things are beyond my control. Well, that's the opposite of what we do at Ranching for Profit. None of that stuff matters. None of that stuff matters. If you didn't hear that, let me repeat that one last time. None of that stuff is important. None of that stuff is going to dictate your profit. What you do about those things is going to dictate your profit. This is the environment in which we choose to do business. We know what a drought looks like. We know what harsh winters look like. We know that dad is entrenched in the way he does things. We know government regulation exists, and we know more may be coming at some point. We know what costs are. So it's up to us to build a business in that environment that works. We have another choice, you know. We could say, well, it's impossible to make a profit, so we're not going to do it. It's all up to us. It's a choice. So we don't, you know, if you look at some of the associations around, I was at well, I'll go ahead and pick on somebody. I was at an Oregon Cattlemen's meeting several years ago, and it was all about how the government's out to get you, how the environmentalists are out to get you, how the packers are out to get you, and you need us. You need this association to protect you from all of these things. I wish I hadn't agreed to do the presentation I was supposed to do, because I felt like just walking out. I just can't handle that kind of environment where everybody's a victim. We don't believe you are a victim. You have control. So a better question than why isn't ranching profitable is this: what can you do, or what can I do to make my ranch more profitable? Well, here's the answer. You can apply the 3 secrets for increasing profit. You can lower the overhead costs. You can find a way to improve the gross margin per unit, or you can increase the turnover. You'll notice that one thing that's not on here is to improve my cost per unit of production, or what they call, what's the term for it? I was just thinking about it a moment ago. Well, unit cost of production. There's nothing about break-even costs here. There's nothing about unit cost of production. There's nothing about my cost per cow here, and there's a reason for that. Those are not meaningful statistics. Is it important to know your cost of production? And I'm going to argue that no, it's not. And I'll show you why. Here's a cow. Well, I was actually looking on the internet for a good picture of a cow facing me, and I couldn't find one, so I had to draw one. So please understand that's a cow, not a tick. I've never claimed to be an artist. Let's say if I have one cow that she's going to need to eat $100 worth of hay for the year. All right, that's how much hay she gets. Now, if I have another cow, that's $100 of hay per cow. If I have another cow, I'm going to need another $100 worth of hay. If I have another cow, another $100 worth of hay. If I have a bunch of cows, I need a bunch of hay. And it's pretty much a direct relationship between the number of cows I have and the amount of hay I have to feed. It's fine to allocate that kind of cost back to a cow. But let's take a pickup truck. Now, the average cost of running a pickup truck on a ranch today is about $15,000. That's between interest, depreciation, repairs, insurance, fuel and oil, and all the rest of it. About $15,000 a year to operate a truck on a ranch. Let's say I have one cow. Well, my pickup cost per cow is $15,000 in that case. What if I have 100 cows? Well, 100 cows, my pickup cost is $150 a cow. What does that tell me? The economists at the universities would say that that tells you your cow is more efficient. No, that's not a more efficient cow. That's a more efficient pickup truck. So this is where we start to get into trouble with using things like unit cost of production, where every cost, including labor and pickup trucks and fencing and all the other things that we spend money on, all of those costs are allocated back to a cow. And you can determine a break-even cost that way. But if you have 5 more cows, your break-even cost has changed. So it's not a meaningful statistic. And if you want to do this for academic precision, then knock yourself out. You can allocate anything you want to allocate. But I'm not interested in doing that. The point of what we do is not academic precision, is to get some information to be able to make for actionable decisions. So we can actually make some decisions that's going to make us some money. I want to go through a real quick review of the 3 secrets, because rather than unit cost of production, we're going to focus on gross margin today and gross product. And I'm going to do just a brief refresher on those things. We break things down into 2 basic types of costs. There's overhead costs, which are costs that tend not to change very much as the units of production change. Units of production down here being cows. All land, here are the rules about overheads. These are costs that tend not to change very much as the units change. The second rule of overheads, if it's a land or a labor cost, it's an overhead, period. Now, some people pay for land on a per head basis. Let me see if I can get my little drawing pad here to work today. And apparently it's not going to behave. No, still doesn't want to behave. Okay, be that way. So we'll do it the old-fashioned way, if there is an old-fashioned way when it comes to computers. Some land costs you pay on a per head basis. And so the cost can go up like that. But it's still a land cost, and land costs make it an overhead. And I'll show you why that has to be true in just a little while. Now, do behave that way. Feed would be one of them. Vaccine, most health-related costs, marketing commissions would behave that way. It would go up directly as the number of cows go up, and we call those direct costs. Then there's gross product, and I'm going to show you how to calculate that in a minute. The gross product measures the total value that I've produced. This is an increase in inventory plus any sales that I might have had. If gross product exceeds direct cost, I remember doing a workshop in Paris, Texas, and there's a fellow up front, kind of a gruff old guy, and I said, when the value of what you produce, gross product, exceeds the cost of producing it, what's that? Immediately he said, well, that's luck. Well, the technical term for that is profit. I turned to him and said, so what do you call it when the cost of production exceeds the value you've produced? And he said, well, that's normal. Notice that you will notice that I don't use the break-even point very much, and we will be talking about it a little bit right now. But knowing your break-even costs has no diagnostic value at all. Am I frozen up here, guys? Can you still hear me? Steve, can you nod if you can hear me?
I can hear you, Dave, but we can't. You are frozen, and on occasion you cut out.
Okay. Is my screen working?
Yeah, everything's working there. So as long as when you're talking to us, we can hear you. I mean,
Okay. Well, other than getting out and hopping back in, I'm not sure what else to do.
yeah, maybe try to stop sharing your screen once and then start it up again.
All right. Let's see what happens. Well, I should have done another little prayer for my computer today. Well, as we're trying to do this, and my little wheel is going around on my computer, we'll see that there's only three things that any business can do anywhere to increase profit. It doesn't matter if it's a ranch or a shoe store or a gas station or IBM, it doesn't matter. You can find a way to reduce the overheads, right? So maybe instead of owning equipment, you lease equipment. But if there's a way of reducing those land or labor costs without impacting production, you'll increase profit. And as soon as my screen comes back, I'll show you that that's true. The second way to increase profit, most people say, well, if you can lower the overheads, how about lowering the direct costs? But direct costs are things like feed and vaccine. What if I eliminate those things? Well, production is going to crash, or it could crash. So we could take the opposite of that. We could say, well, let's increase production. But how do you do that? Typically, you do it by increasing feed costs. So when we look at costs, production costs, and the value of our production, gross product, we need to look at those things simultaneously. And the term we use for that is gross.
We lost him completely there. Let me see if I can text him to make sure he knows. AJ, how's this resonating with you while we're waiting for Dave to jump back on? You're muted, by the way. There you go.
Yeah, I got you now. Yeah, I kind of noticed whenever we had our conversation prior to this that he was
Hopefully I'm back.
going to twist my thinking.
Yes, he's twisting your thinking. You are back, Dave. Now we don't have video still. Let me see here what's going on. It said you can start your own video. So if you hit that button in the bottom left part of your screen, that may pull you back.
Your screen. Well, I'm not seeing where it says I can do that.
It's right beside the microphone.
There we go.
There you go. Hey, you're back.
And that's the low camera. So the other camera is not working, but that's all right. We'll get to. All right.
Nice job. Yeah, that was some quick work there, Dave. Nice job.
Exciting stuff. Exciting. All right. So we can lower the overheads. You know, I think I gave the example of leasing equipment rather than owning equipment. That shouldn't impact production. So if we can reduce our costs of depreciation and repairs by doing that, we can increase our profit. A lot of people will say cut the costs. Well, if we do that, gross product's likely to go down. So what if we increase the gross product? Well, then we're probably going to feed more feed or use fancier bowls or something, and costs are likely to go up. And again, the break-even point gets higher. So the worst part of that is when we increase gross product and increase the inputs, it's not just the cost of the inputs, it's the cost of the inputting that will also go up. And so the overheads tend to rise too. That's actually a picture of modern American ranching today. If you read the magazines, the popular magazines in this industry, that's the strategy they tell you to pursue. What we really need to do is look at improving the gross margin per unit. People think of this unit cost of production where everything is allocated back to account. People think that that's measuring the efficiency of production. It's not. Gross margin per unit is what actually measures production efficiency. And the final thing would be to carry more cows or to do something else on the ranch that will create income. And that's increasing turnover. Those are the only three things that any business anywhere can do to increase profit. The way we figure this out is this. I'll just go through the process real quickly. A breeding herd statistic chart is where we hold the estimates, the performance estimates. What do we think the conception rates are, the open rate, the cull rate? And in order to know these things, we have to have a plan. If you're going to know what the cull rate's going to be, well, you have to have culling criteria. Do we cull anything that's open or dry, where it's got a bad udder, or do we cull for disposition? You've got to figure these things out in order to come up with an estimate. Then we do what's called a stock flow plan. I'm going to do a stock flow plan with you very quickly, a very rough one in just a few minutes. Stock flow plan is where we take the opening inventory of animals and we apply those statistics to project to a closing inventory. And along the way, it's going to show us how many animals we're going to have to sell, how many we're going to need to buy, how much vaccine and feed we're going to need. And it tells us all that a year before we're going to need any of it. That gives us the information for a cash flow. I know how much feed I'm going to have to buy and what I'm going to have to sell. Well, I know when income is going to happen and roughly how much is going to happen. And I know what my costs are going to be. It's not enough to know how many animals I have. I have to know what those animals are worth. And so we do something called evaluation. It's really simple. All we do is take a conservative value on our inventory. The question is, if I had to sell these animals today, if I was forced to sell them, shouldn't say today, but if I had to sell these animals within a week or two, I didn't have time to really market them. What do I know I could get? You know, there's that young bred H2 that's worth a lot of money. And then there's a cow that almost got culled this year and maybe should have got culled this year. So we're going to take a conservative value of the whole herd. Then we're going to use something called a trading account. I'll show you how to do that. To calculate the value of production. We're going to take the costs out of the cash flow, the direct costs out of the cash flow, subtract that from gross product, and that gives us gross margin. And then we're going to take the overhead costs out of the cash flow, subtract that from the total gross margin, and we'll have our profit or loss estimate. We'll know all that a year before we do it. There's a wonderful YouTube video on the Ranching for Profit YouTube channel of a gal in Wyoming who talks about the value of doing these projections. I just love this little video, and Steve, I'm guessing that you saw it at the school. My brain has gone blank right now. Heidi Terrell. But she talks about how they did the numbers and, they were almost in a panic. It was going to be a bad year. And then they realized, wait a minute, this is a plan. It hasn't happened yet. They went back in and figured out what they needed to change, and it turned out to be a great year. That's the value of doing this. When we make these projections, and we're doing this as a projection, it's funny. Most people want to put in the actuals, which is actually much harder and gives you a lot less information. I mean, think about it. How much can you do about what you already did? Well, how much can you do about what happened last year? The answer is nothing. I was doing a workshop a while back, and a woman said that. I said, how much can you do about what happened last year? And she said nothing. And her husband said, well, you can learn from it. She slugged him in the shoulder and said, yeah, right. Anyway, we're projecting to next year because that's where the game's at. You can do something about it. Now, there's a little more to it than that process. Let's take, for example, what I'm thinking might be a typical red Devon producer who's trying to do a grass-finished business. So we're going to take something from conception to consumption. If we're going to do that, we're going to break out 3 livestock enterprises. calf enterprise, a stocker enterprise, and a finishing enterprise. Let's say I also put up some hay, right? That's a separate enterprise too. And let's say that I'm selling meat at a farmer's market or online or whatever, but people are buying meat directly from me. Those are other enterprises as well. Now, for the cow-calf enterprise, I need to project the value of production. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. I'll subtract the direct costs, and that will give me the gross margin. I'm going to do the same for the stockers. I'm going to do the same for the finishing enterprise. I'm going to do the same thing for the hay enterprise. How much hay do I expect to produce? What's it going to be worth? What's the margin? Now, what's it worth? If this hay is getting fed to my livestock, what it's worth isn't what it cost me to produce it. What it's worth is whatever I could sell it for to someone else. So that's the value that the livestock are going to pay the hay enterprise. The value that that hay has is determined by what I could sell it for to someone else. And then the meat, I'm going to do the same thing for the meat enterprise. Gross product minus direct costs gives me gross margin. But these are very, very different enterprises. The livestock enterprises have some things in common. They all use grass. We all probably do a little supplement. There's some health costs. So what we're going to do is separate these out into divisions. My livestock division consists of 3 enterprises. I have a farming division. Even if it's just one enterprise, it's a farming division. And I have a meat division. And the way a division is defined is if the overhead costs, if there are unique overhead costs that apply to this part of the business that has nothing to do with another part of the business. For example, in my hay enterprise, there are probably some pieces of equipment that I've got that I use for hay that I just wouldn't have if I didn't put up hay. They're unique to that division. And here's the test of allocating an overhead cost. And remember, all land and all labor costs are allocated, are overheads. All land and labor costs are overheads. The test is this: would I lose this cost completely if I stopped doing this division? So let's say I rent some ground and I put up hay on it. Would I continue to rent that ground if I wasn't using it for hay? And if the answer is no, I wouldn't, then it's a divisional overhead. Let's say I have a piece of equipment, I'm making payments on it, I've got interest on it, I've got somebody who comes in and stacks hay for me, and if I didn't put up the hay, they wouldn't be stacking the hay, right? Again, that's an overhead cost. But if I wouldn't hire that person, if I didn't put up hay, then it's a business overhead. If I would lose the cost completely, if I stop doing the things in that division, then it's a divisional overhead. So here's what we do. We add up all the gross margins for that division. In the case of farming and the meat division, it's just that one gross margin. We call that the divisional gross margin. And then we subtract the overheads that are unique to that division. So if I rent, let's say my ranch is pretty, let's say I rent about 5,000 acres of grass, all right? It's range ground, it's not pasture, it's not good for farming, it's just pasture. And if I didn't raise livestock, I wouldn't have that range ground. Well, that's a divisional overhead, right? And the same thing for the farming, the divisional overhead there. In the meat business, if there are going to be, maybe I have a delivery van or something else that I use exclusively for that part of the business. So we take the divisional overheads, we subtract that from the gross margin, divisional gross margin, and that gives us divisional profit or loss. Then we take the business overheads. These are overheads that cannot be allocated. And when in doubt, do not allocate. If I have a tractor and I use it 10% for livestock and 90% for farming, don't allocate it 10%, 90%. It's all or nothing. And if it's 10% for livestock and 90% for farming, then it's nothing. Don't allocate that cost. It's a business overhead. And the same with your salary. Although that's probably silly because most of you probably don't pay yourselves, but we can get into that later. That's how we calculate business profit or loss. All right, so that's the structure of accounts. By the way, I'm going to give you my email address when we're done with this. And if any of you are serious about trying to apply, I know this is a lot of stuff to grind through right now. But if any of you are serious about applying this stuff to your business, whether you come to the school or not, I'm happy to talk to you. So I'll get my email, I'll have at the end here. And if you have some questions or just want to start a conversation, we can schedule some time to talk. Okay. Now, some of you, in addition to doing the grass finishing, are developing bulls or selling seed stock. I would create that as another enterprise. I might do it in the livestock division. But one of the things that kills seed stock businesses is the fancy pickups and a bunch of other things that people do to either boost their image or stroke their ego or whatever it might be. But those overheads tend to kill the cattle business. So if that's the case, then you might want to separate it out as a separate division. If you have overhead costs that, because you're selling bulls or selling breeding stock, that you wouldn't have for just a grazing operation, then you might separate that out as a separate division. Now, I want to go into this gross product because there's a number of questions that AJ brought up and others have brought up that are going to be answered by taking a quick look at this. Let's take a look at two enterprises, and we'll start with cow-calf. And I want to calculate gross product. It's a really simple process. We're going to start by valuing the closing inventory. All right, we count the number. Here are how many animals I think I'm going to have, and here's what I think they're going to be worth. Then we subtract the beginning inventory value. I'll show you how to project the closing inventory in just a minute. So right now you might be thinking, how the heck do we do that? But I'll show you in just a minute. The beginning inventory value, we subtract that. Then we add in any sales that we think we're going to have, any livestock sales we think we're going to have, and then we subtract any livestock purchases that we anticipate, the replacement costs we may have. Then we add in the transfers out. And I'll explain what a transfer is in just a moment. And we'll subtract the transfers in. And after doing all that, we have gross product, the value of our production. Now, let's take a quick look at the stocker enterprise here. That transfer out from the cow, well, that's a transfer in to the stockers. All a transfer is a non-cash sale. So the stocker enterprise is essentially buying calves from my cow-calf enterprise. But it's not, I'm not going to take cash out of my wallet and put it in some other wallet, or I'm not going to write a check from my cow account to my stocker account. It's a paper transfer of value. And I have to transfer that at what I think I could sell that animal to for someone else. And whatever value I use to transfer it out of the cows, that has to be the value I transfer it in to the next enterprise at. And if we do this, we'll do the same thing. Stockers will transfer out of that enterprise and into my feeder enterprise. And again, I have to use a realistic, whatever I think the conservative market value is going to be. If I go too low, I'll make my cows look artificially bad and my stockers look artificially good. So I need to get as close to a market value as I think I can get. Now let's take a look at sales for just a moment here. What do you base the sales price on? The question came up a couple of times from a couple of people recently. How do I figure out how to sell breeding stock for? And don't I need to know my cost of production in order to be able to price breeding stock? And the answer is absolutely not. Think about this. Let's say that I am in the pen manufacturing business. All right. My cost structure is really, really high. It costs me $1,000 a pen to produce a pen. Should I price my pen at $1,000? No. The cost, what it takes me to produce this pen is irrelevant to the consumer. I need to value my product at what the value is for the consumer. What will the market bear for my pen? Let's say I'm a great pen producer and it only cost me a penny to produce this pen. Should I sell it for 2 pennies? That's 100% profit margin on this pen. No. If I can sell it for $1, then I made a 99-cent profit. So I don't need to know my cost of production in order to value this pen. This pen is not based on the cost it took me to, the value of this pen is not based on the cost of producing this pen. The value of that pen is based on what the market will bear. And the same thing is going to be true. It's probably more obviously true with cattle than pens. Pens may be a stupid example, but it's no less true with cattle. Now, the best way or the most accurate way to find out what the value of an animal is through an auction. With unlimited number of buyers bidding on it, that is theoretically the way you find value. But I was scrolling around on the web looking at different private treaty sales for Red Devon cattle, and I was coming up with some reasonable ranges of prices. Some seemed extreme, and so here's the deal: if you're buying breeding stock, then you do have to look at your cost of production to see if I'm going to buy this animal, am I going to make money? If you can't make money, then don't pay that price. But just because your cost of production is high doesn't mean you can dictate an artificially high sale value. And we can get into that more a little later if you want. I want to take a moment on cow depreciation. I told AJ, he asked me if we could get into this, and I almost talked myself out of it, saying, well, in the seed stock business, is this really important? And I had kind of convinced myself that maybe it wasn't so important. And then I talked to a couple of seed stock guys, I guess it was just last week, and they told me that I was nearly an idiot. That of course it's important for two reasons. One, it does impact their business, but it certainly impacts their customers' businesses. And you might think about it this way. If you're in the seed stock business, what is it you're really selling? Now, sales to most people just means what is the purpose of making a sale? And for most people, they would define the purpose as making money. But if if your ranch is really a business, making money is the secondary purpose of making a sale. The primary purpose of making a sale must be to help a customer be successful. That is your purpose as a business person in making a sale, to help the customer be successful. In doing that, you have to make some money too. All right, so there's that exchange, but you have to provide at least the value to the customer that you get in terms of money for yourself. So let's take a look at this. I think it's important. If you're in the seed stock business, your business is to help a customer build a profitable business, if that's what they want to do. Maybe it's just a hobby to them and they don't really care. But whatever their purpose in having these cattle is, it's your job, if you will, to help them be satisfied with what they're doing. Let's say that one of the things they want to do is make a profit. Well, then you'd better understand depreciation. We're going to take a look at two things here. We're going to take a look at, whoops, I got the wrong thing circled there. I want to take a look at the closing inventory value, not the beginning inventory value. Sorry about that. Now, let's say that the beginning, let's say I'm buying an animal. Let's say I buy a bred heifer. And let's say I pay $2,100 for that bred heifer. That might be artificially low. It might be high. It depends on if it's registered or commercial. A lot of things are going to dictate that. Let's say I buy a bred heifer for $2,100 and that I value her in my closing inventory at $1,200. First of all, when she's in my closing inventory, she's probably not a bred heifer anymore. She's probably going to have a calf and be pregnant for the second time. So she's changed classes. But either way, when I am bringing it in my trading account, because that's what this is called, a trading account. In my trading account, I'm valuing the inventory conservatively. I put the sale in at, or the purchase in at exactly what I think I'm going to have to pay, market value. But then I'm going to value that animal conservatively. So the difference between this $2,100 and the $1,200, that's a difference of $900. Let's take this a little further. By the way, every number I use here is going to be wrong. It's okay. It's going to be close. Let's say I start the year with 100 pregnant cows. Right? Some of them are going to die. Let's pretend I have 2% death loss. If I have 2% death loss, that means that 98% of them live. Now, 98 pregnant cows, will they all wean a calf? Probably not. There might be a late-term abortion, might be a calf that gets stuck in the mud or struck by lightning. Let's pretend that 5% of those animals don't wean a calf. 5% are dry. What are we going to do with those cows? Well, most people wouldn't cull them, so we'll put them in a truck and send them down the road. Now, 98 minus 5 is 93. That means if 5 were wet of those 98, that means, 5 were dry, 93 were wet. So we're going to wean 93 calves. Now, of those wet cows, might there be one that chases you out of the corral now and then, or maybe has a cancer eye or bad udder or at foot rot or whatever it might be, might we cull some of those animals for non-reproductive reasons? That's what we're going. If we're culling for reproductive reasons, that's different. If we're culling for non-reproductive reasons, that's what we call a cull. We're going to ship these animals. That's why I put them in a boat. So 5% of 93. And by the way, 5% dry, 5% cull. These rates I'm using, I just pulled them out of air, just based on conservative averages that I see. Your numbers will be different, and I would encourage you to put your numbers in this same process and see what you come up with. But 5% cull, that means 5% of these animals are shipped. 93 minus 5 leaves 88 that got exposed to the bull. The question is, will they all get pregnant? And of course, they won't all get pregnant. By the way, if they did all get pregnant, you probably have the most unprofitable business in the history of red Devon cattle. You can get high conception rates and you can get high weaning rates and all the rest of it. But the cost of doing that can be absolutely astronomical. Keep in mind that the most productive business, at least I've never seen the most productive business be the most profitable. I have yet to see that. Well, these 88 exposed, let's say that the conception rate is 92%. That means 8% are going to be open. So down the road they go. That leaves us with 80 of the original 100 that are pregnant and kept. If I want to keep the herd at 100 cows, that means I'm going to need 20 replacements. Okay, now let's take those statistics and apply them in a little different format. The first year, we started with 100 animals. Between the dead, the dry, the culls, and the opens, we lost 20 of them. That left us with 80 animals, pregnant and kept. We're going to follow this original 100 animals over a few years and see what happens. So if those 80 that were pregnant and kept, that becomes my beginning inventory for year 2. Now the dead, the dry, the culls, and the opens, well, we lose another 16. Pregnant and kept after the second year, 64. Now that's the opening inventory for the third year. Dead, dry, culls, and opens at 20%, we lose another 13. At the end of the third year, we have 51 of the original 100 animals. So let me ask you all this. What's the average productive life of a cow? How many calves does a typical cow wean in her lifetime? And the answer is 3. Red Devons are known for longevity. Yeah, well, maybe. You might be able to creep that up to 4, and biologically, you might even be able to get to 5. But by the time you get to 5, and I don't care what kind of breed of animal you have getting to 5, you will not be profitable. Not if you're starting by raising your own replacements. And I know it doesn't happen this way. This 20% rate doesn't apply across the board. The H2s fall out faster than any other class of animal. But in average, this is reality if you're raising your own heifers. Now, 51 animals, that means half the herd is gone after 3 years. At $900 of depreciation we had over 3 years, that's $300 of depreciation a year on every cow, every year. At least that's the average for your business. You have 100 cows, 300 times 100 is $30,000 of depreciation. People wonder what the biggest cost of keeping a cow is. Maybe it's rent, maybe it's feed, but for a lot of you, it's depreciation. In a high market, depreciation can run as high as $500 a head. In a depressed market, it's probably closer to 200 or 250. Most people don't even see it happening. And the reason they don't see it happening, they feel their wallet being empty, but they don't see it happening because it's automatically accounted for in here. When I transfer animals in or when I buy animals, I see I've misspelled purchases. When I transfer animals in or buy animals, I'm buying them at the market value and I'm valuing them conservatively. Now we can have, that's a discussion that if you want to have in more depth, that's one we probably ought to do on the side through email or a phone call down the road. Now, $300 an animal is not chump change. So maybe we ought to spend just a moment of looking at what you can do about depreciation, because there are 4 things you can do. There are only 4 things that you can do about depreciation, and they're all on this graph. The first one, and notice here that this H1 is about the same value as the cull animal on the tail end. Notice when most of this depreciation happens. It happens in the animal's 6th year. So one strategy is not to have an animal when it turns 6. This heifer calf is going to in order for something to depreciate, it must first appreciate in value. So through the heifer calf to the H1 phase to the H2 phase, it's increasing in value. Maybe a little more increase after it's when it's bred for the second time, and it will maintain its value for another year or maybe 2. But at that point, if you look at market reports, the value falls off the table. So one strategy is to cheapen up your replacement costs. By the way, you will not cheapen up your replacement costs necessarily by raising your own replacements. 2, increase the value of the culls. In other words, don't sell an open animal. Get it pregnant. It will fit somebody's breeding season somewhere. The third strategy would be to get another calf out of that cow. You remember we had $900 of depreciation? Well, let's take a look at something real quick. Although I wonder if this is maybe what made it freeze in the first place. If I have $900 of depreciation, I divided that by 3, it was $300. But what if I divide it by 4? I believe that's $225 of depreciation per animal. So I've reduced depreciation by getting that 4th year. I haven't eliminated it, but I've reduced it. And the final thing would be to sell them before they get to be 6 years old. That's just when everybody else thinks they have all the value in the world. You know, I heard Bud Williams describe it this way once. He said if ranchers were car dealers, there'd be a car on the lot that was so good and fancy they'd refuse to sell it. You know, somebody would come by and say, "Oh, I'm interested in that car. Oh, I could never let that one go. It's so clean and gets such good mileage and it's got the leather interior. Oh, I could never sell that car." Well, you know, if you're in business, you should be in the business of selling value. And if somebody sees value, you should be willing to let it go. So it could be one strategy is that when those animals turn 6, down the road they go, because other people think they have value when you know they're just about to lose all the value they had. Now, I want to do one last thing with y'all. And again, I do hope you'll follow up. I've never charged a dime to talk to folks on the phone about this stuff. As you can probably tell, I do enjoy talking about this stuff. In its simplest terms, the way you calculate profit is to take gross margin and subtract the overhead costs. It gives you profit or loss. So in its simplest form, you could say that if profit's a problem, it's either a function of gross margin or overhead costs. Well, gross margin is 2 things. There's actually, remember, there aren't 2 ways to increase profit. There are 3. There was reduce the overheads, improve the gross margin, and increase turnover. You see, within gross margin, there are 2 numbers. There's gross margin per unit and the number of units. Well, turnover is 2 things, it turns out. It's the number of units, so you can increase numbers, and it's the number of enterprises. So the number of units in my cows, the number of units in my stockers, the number of units in my finishers, the scale of my hay. Am I doing direct marketing? Am I selling grass-finished beef? Am I selling seed stock? What are all the different enterprises I have, and what's the scale in those enterprises? Then the gross margin per unit. Gross product minus direct cost for each enterprise. A gross product is a function of 2 things, really. It's the function of the price that I get or the value I've produced and how many units I produced. So price and production. And the price is 2 things. It's the market and your marketing. Notice that price is not a function of your cost of production. It's what the market will bear. And then production is 2 things. If you're in the cow-calf business, it's how many you had, that's reproduction, and how big they were. And there aren't very many direct costs. There's interest on the cow note. This is not interest on land or machinery. This is interest on the cow note. And if you don't have a cow note, guess what? We're still going to make you pay it. This is what we call opportunity interest. And I don't think we have enough time to get in why it's important to. Well, I might just take a minute and tell you why it's important. why it's critical that you take it. There's feed costs and there's health costs. And then there's the overhead costs, land and labor. And there's two types of land costs. There's the cost of getting it and there's the cost of keeping it. And by keeping, I mean upkeep, maintenance and repair. I just say getting and keeping so it stays straight in my head. And then labor, there's two types of labor costs. There's the cost of people and there's the cost of the things that people use. Now, the reason I crossed out interest is because you have to pay it on the last talk. You have to show it on the books anyway. Same thing with labor. You might think because it's family labor, it's free. No, nobody gets to work for free. You have to put in the cost of what would it cost to replace the work that you do. Now, you don't have to pay it. I mean, if you don't want to pay yourself, don't pay yourself. If you can't afford to pay yourself, you don't have to do it. You don't have to do anything. But you should show it on the books, and you should call it deferred wages because someday the business should pay you that money back. Now, let me show you why we include interest here. If my gross margin per unit is good, and I'll tell you how to tell if it's good right now. If it's 70%, if you take gross product and divide it by gross margin, right? Is that right? Sorry, I got it backwards. Gross margin divided by gross product. That should be 70% or 0.7. If it's better than 0.7, you've got a winner. You've got a really efficient enterprise. If it's below that, yeah, you got a lot of room. You got room to improve. I would say 65, 70%, you're okay. If you're below 60%, there's no way you should expand that enterprise until you fix the margin. Now, that number, that 70% includes the cost of, that includes that interest cost, and it includes it at 10% of the beginning inventory value of the herd. So if my herd's worth $100,000, I'm going to charge 10% opportunity interest on that. If I don't, I can't use the benchmark I just gave you. I can't use that 70% because that number is calculated using that statistic. Now, let me show you why this is not just a theoretical cost. If I've calculated this gross margin using this number and it's good, what it tells me is I should go to the banker and borrow money to expand the herd. That would be a really profitable thing to do. How do I know it will make me money? I've already included the finance cost in there. Now, you might think 10% on the beginning value, but that beginning inventory value was really, really conservative. That's right, it was conservative. Let's say it was, I think we had $1,200 on a cow, which is probably pretty conservative. 10% of that is $120. And what was the replacement cost? That was $2,000, $2,100, somewhere in there. And what can I get on a cattle note right now? About 6%. What's 6% of $2,100? Let's see, it's $120. Guess what? Using 10% of the beginning inventory value, that was $120. The actual interest on what cows are worth right now is $126. I'm off by $6. If you think $6 is the difference between a good year and a bad year, you're mistaken. It was never going to be a good year, right? So, you know, horseshoes and hand grenades, right? All we're doing is getting, I told you earlier, every number is going to be wrong. All we got to do is get it close. But if I include the interest cost in there and I get better than 70% or better, it tells me I should go out and use the other, what Alan Nation used to call it OPM, other people's money. I should use other people's money to expand my herd. Now, let me show you one other thing about why this approach has so much more power to it than unit cost of production. In unit cost of production, I'm allocating all these land and labor costs back to the cow. And I have completely lost the diagnostic value. Right now, if I tell you that gross margin per unit's a problem, you know it's either gross product or direct cost. And if I tell you it's direct cost, you know it's either feed or health. If it's gross product, it's either price or production. If it's production, it's reproduction or gain. And we have benchmarks that, just like that 70% for gross margin per unit, we have benchmarks that will walk you all the way through that to pinpoint where the problem is. If I tell you right now that overheads are the issue, you know it's either a land issue or a labor issue. And if I give you the benchmark for labor, then you know it's either people or machinery. One of those two things. That's all it can be. Again, we're not doing this for some kind of academic precision. We're doing this to get actionable information, stuff we can make decisions on right now to build a more profitable, prosperous business and better life. If I start lumping the land and labor costs in back on the cow, start throwing it back up here, I've completely lost the diagnostic value of this tool. You know, a break-even cost is maybe of academic interest. But let's say your break-even cost is $1.50 and calf prices are $1.45. Okay, what are you going to do? Should you find ways to increase calf value, or should you find a way to decrease costs? And if you do decrease costs, should it be feed costs, health costs, land costs, or labor costs? There's no way of knowing. So why bother with it? I mean, we only have a limited amount of time that we're willing to work on the business. We're so busy working in it, we hardly ever spend time to work on it. So if we're going to have a limited amount of time to work on it, shouldn't we get the most value that we can out of that limited time? Let me show you what the benchmark businesses, these would be the average businesses in executive link versus the typical ranch in North America are doing. Out of $1 of gross, that's $1 of gross product I've drawn up here. So $1 of value the business has produced. Out of that $1, the business spends about 30 cents on direct costs, about 40 cents on overhead costs, and that leaves 30 cents as profit. The benchmark businesses in executive link have a return on assets of 7.5%. So when people say ranching for profit's an oxymoron, they don't listen because they know it doesn't have to be that way. Your neighbor's ranch is a little bit different. They're spending about 45 cents on direct costs. They're spending about 85 cents on overheads, which means that they're producing a 30-cent loss. For every dollar of value they produce, they lose 30 cents. Negative 1.5% is the average return on assets in North American ranching. That's been confirmed by the University of Nebraska, Texas A&M. It's a pretty well accepted statistic. And you might say, how does this place survive? Well, remember that these overhead costs include the wage that you should be paying yourself, but most people don't pay themselves. It also includes rent for the land. Now, if you own the land, you're probably not paying yourself rent, but you should be. We make a big deal about the difference between the land investment and the livestock business. Livestock should be renting the land. So these overhead costs include some costs that you're probably not considering right now. AJ, I think I've gone about an hour, maybe just a little bit over. And I think maybe it'd be better right now to open it up for questions. Let me just end by saying, if you want more information, there's a lot more available. I've got 2 books and a DVD that are available. The books are available on Amazon or the RMC website. The 3 Secrets DVD is available on the Ranching for Profit website. You can email me at pratt@ranchmanagement.com if you have questions that you'd like to discuss personally. And we can do this through email, or we can schedule some time to talk on the phone. There's a lot of information on the Ranching for Profit website, and it's real simple, just ranchingforprofit.com. Dallas, I wrote this for 17 or 18 years, a column called Profit Tips, a blog every other week. And Dallas has been writing it since I stopped. He's been going about 1.5 years on it. And there's archives of profit tips in there that you can knock yourself out exploring. And then there's a whole bunch of videos on the YouTube channel that get into a lot of the things we were talking about today. So if you want more, there is more. And with that, AJ and Steve, if there's some questions, I'd be happy to try to take them. Oops, I should stop sharing my screen, I suppose.
All right, while Dave's doing that, just a reminder that you can use the Q&A button at the bottom and we'll facilitate a conversation. AJ, do you have a question for Dave you want to kick this off with?
I just wanted to comment. We had 4 people that called in today, and I guess I should say I'm glad I'm not sitting in your shoes right now, because visually seeing that, it'd be pretty difficult. So definitely you want to reach out and get these resources in your hands so you can see that and you can get through it, because it's a lot even just sitting here watching Dave. I think maybe a question to Dave that I had jotted down there, and we're talking about depreciation on the cow and like how much she dropped off. What would you say to someone that was wanting to buy a proven cow that had already, that depreciation had already been pretty much taken off? If they're looking at, they're looking at a cow that has, proven prodigy, and they've seen what the results are, taking on less of a risk by buying that proven animal compared to like an up and coming heifer?
Every answer that I give you is going to begin with the same phrase. It depends. And the answer is probably, it's probably a good idea. But if you remember that curve that went up for the H1 and H2, kind of leveled out and then came crashing down. Now, if this is where an animal is 6 years old right here, and let's say this is when she's 8 years old here. If this is my herd, I would seriously consider selling the animals that are 6 and 7 years old. But once they're 8 years old, they're not going to depreciate much more. I might just wind up keeping those. And if I was getting into the business for the first time, well, even if I'd been in the business for the first time, one way to cheapen up replacements, instead of getting them here, what if those became my replacements? Proven cows. I'm not going to be calving out. I wouldn't be calving out first calf heifers. There's something to be said for that. And how much more value do these animals really going to lose? So I think that's a viable strategy. And they don't necessarily have to be here. For example, let's say that I had, this is some work I did with a friend of mine, Roger Ingram, when I was with the University of California. Roger and I did a lot of work together. And one of the things, we had a project at one of the field stations where we changed the calving season on a commercial cow herd from what's typical in California, which is the fall, September, October, November. We changed it to April. That's when the deer are having their fawns. That's when our peak grass growth is in this annual grassland out here. Well, our need for replacements, if we're going to calve in April, that means we're going to breed in July. Well, so we'd be getting our replacements in late May and June. Well, with people calving typically in September, October, November, they're preg checking in May. And so all their open cows are coming on the market. And these older open cows were flooding the market, the price would crash, and those would become our replacements. When we would have an open cow, and almost all of those cows, because the postpartum and estrus period was so long, almost all of those cows would be cycling. When we would have an open cow, we would cull it out of our herd for more than we were paying for our replacements. And that's not because we were great marketers, that's just because we structured the business in such a way that it fit that cycle. And if you can, we didn't just we not only eliminated depreciation, our culls appreciated in value because of that. Now, so often, if you're not aware of depreciation, how could you possibly manage it? So that's the point. But so that's a way we were cheapening up our replacements by not raising our own and not buying H1s and H2s, but buying H3s and H4s from other people's open cows. But another strategy, the one you just pointed out, would be maybe to get them here. And I'm not going to tell somebody that that's what they ought to do, because everybody's solution, well, not everybody's solution, but everybody is different. And AJ, what fits your operation may not be the ideal strategy for Steve or someone else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
What else do we have?
Let me see here. Scott Brady just says, thanks. There's a lot of great info presented. Thank you to all of you. And thanks for opening with a prayer as well. So you're welcome, Scott. We're thankful to Dave that you would do this again with us, Dave. It's such a challenge to listen and to take notes. And all right, so my question is, well,
Steve, we need to add one thing to that, not to make light of it, but next time we say a prayer, let's pray for the internet connection too.
Absolutely, definitely should do that. Hey, we're still moving though. That's a good thing. So you said if they all get rebred, you might be spending too much to have that high of a conception rate. I've heard you talk about this and it's really interesting. Can you break that down a little bit? Maybe the difference between a 75 and 80% conception rate and a 95% conception rate?
Yeah, I have a hard time talking without drawing a picture. So let me, oops, I forgot to share the darn. Let's get back and get back to where I was. There we go. Okay, let's say, and I can't tell you what the optimum number is going to be, Steve.
Right.
But let's say that I have a cow herd, 100 cows, and I don't give them any hay, and I don't give them any vaccine, no mineral. By the way, this is not a recommendation, but these animals have absolutely no inputs at all. They're running with the bull. Let's say I do one thing. That's I put the bulls in for a 60-day breeding season, then I pull them out. But there's no other inputs at all. Would any of these animals ever get pregnant?
Yes.
Okay. Roughly what percentage do you think might get pregnant?
75.
75%. All right. Now, I can't go to the coffee shop and say, well, my conception rates are 75%. I need something better than that to brag about. So let's give them a little bit of hay and maybe a mineral. All right. And let's get that up to 80%. All right. Hot dog. And I did that by spending a little bit of money. Let's forget the hay. Let's just say I got some mineral, right? I spent a little bit of money on mineral and I was able to get that 5% increase. Well, I can't go to the coffee shop and brag about an 80% conception rate. That's too low. So let's do something else. Let's get that up to 90%. Now I'll tell you what, let's do 85%. We'll keep it 5% increments. Now, in order to do that, let's say I decide I'm going to feed a little hay. Now let's get it up to 90%. And let's say that's going to require some kind of health program. Let's get it up to 95%. I could do that. I don't know what other kind of input it's going to be. But every time I go up that ladder, the cost is going to get bigger for that next increment. But here's the problem. This little dollar sign right here, that wasn't just on this 5%. I spent that on the 75% that didn't need it. And I spent it on 20% that still didn't give me a return from it. And this next dollar sign to get the next from 80 to 85%. Well, I spent that on 80% of the animals that would have given me a result without spending that money on them. And I spent it on 15% that still didn't give me a return from that investment. And the same thing with the next increment. I spent that on 85% of the animals that did not need it to give me a return. People will look at this 95%. Sometimes they look at the cost of getting there. That's okay. Sometimes they don't. But they'll take this 95% and then they'll go brag about how good their cattle are. And I just scratch my head because which ones were the good cattle? Weren't they the 75% that would have got pregnant without any inputs at all? And if that's the case, how will I ever identify these if I'm willing to subsidize those? And I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that. So if I want to identify the good, and I'm not saying you pull all the inputs out, I'm not arguing that. Please believe me, I'm not making that case. But this is why when inputs start going up and I start looking at 95, 94, 95, 96% conception rates, I start to get worried. Because the only way to support that kind of production, unless I'm in a very forgiving environment, the only way to support that is with inputs. And it's not just the cost of the feed, it's the cost of the feeding. Now I need labor and I need infrastructure and I need equipment to make all those things happen. And that's where the economics of ranching begin to fall apart. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Go ahead, AJ. How do you land on that?
It definitely strikes a nerve whenever he says that. So, personally, Dave, I have a smaller herd. So, in my herd, I'm thinking, well, if I don't have a lot of land and I don't have a lot, I better be living rates and having healthy calves. And then whenever I do fall short and I have, say, 2 out of 18 that die, then I'm like immediately scratching my head down on myself saying, geez, I only have 18. How the heck did I not, have 100%? And so I think I take it pretty hard on myself about it instead of looking at other avenues of being profitable in the overall picture. I'm looking at individuals.
It's just as in the most productive business, in my experience, has never been the most profitable. There is a well-known seed stock producer. It's not a Devon person, but a well-known seed stock producer who likes to say that lower costs equal higher profit. And that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. It's not, the point is not to eliminate costs. It's to find the sweet spot. And gross margin per unit will show you where the sweet spot is. Stan Parsons used to say, I love this, you cannot starve a profit into a business. You cannot starve a profit into a business. That's absolutely true. So you get to a point where, this is why the school takes a week, because there's a context that's important for these things. When we start looking at building a business that works with nature, well, we find that a lot of the input costs start falling away. Some of you may be familiar with a disease called grass tetany. I hope you're not. Some of you may be. Grass tetany is pretty much, in my experience, a man-made disease. It's a disease that happens, magnesium deficiency, in animals that are high performing, and it tends to happen when grass is green and short, and spring you don't have the volume yet, but that's when you tend to have the problems. Nature wouldn't calve in those conditions. She wouldn't have an animal that has that kind of requirement on that kind of feed. She doesn't work that way. And so when, for example, in the herd we had, when there were heavily lactating cows in the winter, when we'd have this much green feed available, grass tetany was an issue. Once we changed the calving season, it's not there. There's another disease in California and parts of Oregon called foothill abortion. It's just the timing of the calving season again. It's a big problem for California ranchers. And in fact, they do things, I don't want to get into that too far, but there are things that they do to develop immunity in their herds, but it costs money and it takes time. It's a man-made disease. Once you get the cows in sync with what nature would be doing with the calving season, it's not a problem. It's simply not a problem. So there's a lot of things that we do in the name of being more productive that make us less profitable and get away from letting nature do most of the work. I think a lot of people use it as a tagline, like lip service, to work with nature. But I don't know that a lot of people really know what that means. And part of it is if we drew out those three enterprises, cow, calf, stocker, and feeder, right? So if I'm going from conception to consumption, those will be my three enterprises, plus I'm going to have a meat business. But what if I've got some really a disproportionate amount of finishing feed? And by finishing feed, I mean dairy quality feed, really good feed. And I'm grazing cows on that. Well, I might as well shoot myself in the head. If one of my goals is to make profit, because that feed is too good for a cow. Conversely, let's say that I'm in Wyoming and I have a lot of really rough country and low quality feed, what I would call cow feed. Or I break feed down into three categories: cow feed, growing feed, and finishing feed, or breeding feed, growing feed, and finishing feed. And the finishing feed is the dairy quality stuff. Growing feed is pretty good irrigated pasture, and cow feed is pretty rough stuff, right? If I've got a lot of rough stuff and I'm trying to finish animals on that, good luck, right? So part of it is looking at your resource. What will this resource support? And maybe it's, if I've got really good feed, maybe I still own cows, but maybe I have somebody else put them out on somebody else's place, so that I can optimize the use of the feed that I've got. If I've got finishing feed, well, I ought to be finishing animals. I was up at a producer's place I guess it was just last week. Now that I'm COVID bulletproof, I'm 2 weeks past my second vaccination, so I feel like I'm Superman now. But these guys, they are essentially shipping out. They've got some really good high quality feed, and they're shipping out all the enterprises that require low quality feed, so that they can increase the turnover of the enterprises that they've got the capacity to support. Otherwise, that feed just it's wasted going through a cow. The cow doesn't need that. Anyway, that's too much of a rabbit trail for right now, probably.
I did have another question here, Dave. It says, is there any tax benefit in depreciating a cow? Which is kind of what kind of started me when I was doing my taxes. That's people talked about depreciation on your taxes for a cow. But
I have no idea. That's a question for your accountant.
okay, thank you.
I've never let tax consequences drive decisions. The way I describe it is a lot of ranches are loaded with monuments to tax avoidance. We treat taxes. I don't think anybody likes paying taxes but me. And that, to be fair, I would like to find a way to minimize my taxes after I have a tax problem, but not before. I know how to minimize my taxes. I can make a loss every year. Gee, wouldn't that be great to lose all my money so I don't have to pay taxes? No, if I have a big tax liability, it means I made a big profit. So I'm pretty happy about having that tax problem. We ought to aspire to have tax problems. Now, once we have them, we ought to find ways to deal with them. But the way a lot of people deal with them is by taking that money and buying something so that they don't have to pay taxes. But that thing that they buy depreciates, requires repairs. I'll give you one quick example. There's a ranch in Eastern Oregon. They bought this, I think it was $40,000 for this machinery, this thing that needs to be pulled by a D8 to crush brush. This guy had an obsession with killing sagebrush. So they buy this thing, and I'm walking by and I say, wow, that's a big thing. And he says, yeah, we got that for to avoid paying taxes. Maybe it was $60,000. I can't remember. Now, $60,000 on that thing would mean they paid probably $20,000 less in taxes. Now, anyway, it looked brand new. And the guy explained that, no, it wasn't brand new, but they just didn't have a tractor that was big enough to pull it yet. So they bought this thing to avoid taxes. They spent $60,000 to avoid paying $20,000 of taxes. Now, if they had taken that $40,000 and put it in something, let's say put it in a cow, right? That would be 20 cows. And let's say the gross margin on a cow is $400. Well, 20 times 400, that's $8,000, right? So that's $8,000 of income over 10 years. That's $80,000 of income this thing has been sitting there tying up $40,000 of capital that could have produced $80,000 of income over 10 years. And it's, when you look at it from an objective standpoint, and understand this, I don't own one stinking cow, and I don't have a ranch. Now, you might think, well, what does he know about ranching? Well, I'll tell you what, that makes me objective about ranching. When you take an objective look at what people do to avoid paying taxes, it's absolutely insane. And it keeps us from building profitable businesses. There are monuments to tax avoidance on virtually any ranch you'll go to. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox for a minute.
Thanks, Dave. We have another just another comment here from Jenny. She said, thanks so much for the content. So
Cool.
great success again, Dave. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think Steve probably wrap things up here.
Yeah, this was great, Dave. Thank you again. It's always a pleasure to see you and to learn from you. I'd encourage people to keep looking, like to pursue the profit tips that Dave has written and that Dallas has. They're free. They come as an email at times. And then also jump on YouTube and look at the videos. I mean, Dave has spent hours putting together YouTube videos of this content. So thanks a bunch, Dave. It's been great to see you again and to catch up a little bit beforehand and to learn.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to go find a new computer now.
All right. AJ, you have anything else?
Wrap up and say here in 2 weeks on Wednesday, we got the 21st. I'm going to be doing a webinar on value-added products for meat, just breaking down primals into the different unique cuts that possibly could help with your merchandising. Get tuned into that one. Look forward to seeing you guys here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so you broke up a little bit. Did you catch that, Dave? Like he was breaking up on your end too?
Yeah, he was breaking up here.
So
Okay.
yeah, AJ's hosting a webinar, going to run a webinar. AJ runs O'Neill's Meats along with a Devon Hurd. He's got a butcher shop. And so he's taking us behind the scenes in the butcher shop to look at breaking down a carcass and different primals to give us the opportunities to understand how to maximize our gross margin per unit, really is what it comes down to.
But Steve, let me add just one thing. I invited people to email me, and I'm serious about that. But this is my wife's computer, and I don't know how to get my email on her computer, and I hate doing email on a phone. So, folks, I absolutely invite you to email me, but give me a couple days to get a new computer.
That's great. Awesome. Well, hopefully it's quick, and I'd recommend.
All right,
Apple
I'll sign off,
personally.
guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. AJ, good job.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
See ya. See y'all. Thank you.